Bonjour, ladies and gentlemen. Sega used to be him, console king. Sonic had attitude, the adverts were violent, but now they're just that weird uncle that turns up at family events uninvited. Look at this. This is the game they pinned their hopes on. This is Sega's legacy. Sonic literally made out with a human woman. Who wrote that? Elon Musk. In 1983, Sega released their first console, the SG-1000. It went head to head with the Nintendo Famicom and immediately got uppercutted into irrelevance.
I need to put my hands in my pocket or something. I feel like I'm just very theatrical.
It sold about 2 million units, but the Famicom? That thing sold 19 million units in Japan alone. So why did the SG-1000 flop? Easy. It looked outdated. Even when it launched, it barely had any good games, and no big mascots to carry the console. Meanwhile, Nintendo came out with Mario and a lineup that actually slapped. So, in 1985, Sega tried again with the Master System. Graphically, better than the NES, who was its competitor at the time. It had more colours, sharper sprites, but it didn't matter. Nintendo had already locked down third-party developers with Mafia-style exclusivity deals. Basically, if you made a game for Nintendo, you couldn't touch Sega. And everyone wanted to be on the NES because it was dominating the market. The Master System sold about 10 to 13 million units, while the NES sold 62 million. It fared okay in Europe and Brazil, but in Japan and America it was almost invisible. Sega even tried to have their own Mario, a character called Alex Kidd. He was this monkey-eared martial artist prince who punched things and rode motorcycles and helicopters. His first game, Alex Kidd in the Miracle World, was actually built into the Master System in later models. The game had charm, but it wasn't iconic. Mario was a plumber rescuing a princess. Alex Kidd? He was just solving puzzles and fighting in rock, paper, scissors boss battles. It was weird and the vibes just weren't right. Alex Kidd didn't have the star power to carry the brand. Then came the big one, 1988, the Sega Mega Drive, or the Sega Genesis in the US. And with that, they introduced a new mascot, Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog. This blue blur wasn't just fast. He was edgy, had attitude, and wore sneakers like he was about to drop a mixtape. Sonic was Sega's answer to Mario, and kids ate it up. He wasn't rescuing a princess. He was collecting rings and smashing robots at supersonic speed. This was the character that finally gave Sega some proper identity. And their marketing was an all-out warfare. Genesis does what Nintendo don't. They came for blood, and it worked, at least in North America. They sold 30 to 35 million units, a record for the company. But globally, Nintendo still edged it, with the SNES hitting around 49 million. Sega's momentum was real, but it depended on regional battles. In Japan, the SNES clapped them. But in the US, Sega actually dominated for a bit, but that didn't last long. This Genesis era gave us Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Sonic & Knuckles, games that are widely considered classics online. Sonic 2 especially is often praised as peak platforming. Loop-de-loops, Chaos Emeralds, Tails following you like a little brother, all that became iconic. These games are still celebrated for defining a generation of platformers. Then in 1990, Sega dropped the Game Gear, and they left no crumbs, because all the crumbs came out their arsehole in shit. This was their answer to the Game Boy. It had a backlit full-colour screen and better graphics. On paper, it should have smoked the Game Boy, but in real life, it was a disaster. The Game Gear chewed through 6 AA batteries in just a couple of hours. It was bulky, expensive, and the library was very weak. Meanwhile, the Game Boy was cheap, durable, and even came packed in with Tetris. The Game Gear sold 10.6 million units. The Game Boy? 118 million. 180 million units. I don't know why you would have assumed it was something different. The Sega built a Ferrari that stalled every 5 minutes. It did have Sonic games like Sonic Chaos, Sonic Triple Trouble, and Sonic Blast, but public reception was lukewarm. Most found them inferior to the Genesis titles. They looked worse, played worse, and felt like Diet Sonic. Now we enter the flop territory. 1994. The Sega Saturn. This was their big 32-bit console. Sounds good, right? Except they made their hardware insanely complex. 2 CPUs that developers struggled to code for, including Sega themselves. And to make it worse, they surprise launched it 4 months early without telling developers or retailers. There were barely any games ready. Meanwhile, Sony shows up with the PlayStation 1. Easy to develop for, cheaper, and loaded up with games like Tekken and Final Fantasy. The Saturn sold 9.26 million units. PlayStation 1? They bloody did win 102 million units! Sega dropped Sonic R and tried porting older Sonic games, but online opinion at the time heavily criticised the lack of a true 3D Sonic platformer. The absence of a proper mainline Sonic title on the Sega Saturn is now seen as one of Sega's biggest missteps. It's fair to say they were on a downward spiral and probably had one last chance to win over the market again, but then they released the Sega Dreamcast. Now this console was ahead of its time. It had online gaming, a built-in modern visual memory unit, and banger games like Jet Set Radio and Crazy Taxi. But even with all that, it still got smoked. Sega's brand was already too damaged. Third-party developers were scared off, and then the real kick, Sony announced the PS2, and people just waited for that instead. It doesn't matter how good the Dreamcast was, the PS2 hype killed it before it even had a chance. The Dreamcast sold 9.13 million, whilst the PS2 a record high of 155 million. Sega officially rage quit consoles after this. But some of the upsides to this console were the introductions of games like Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2, both of which are still celebrated online as the last truly great Sonic games. The Chaos Garden, iconic. The gameplay, fast and fresh, even if the camera was fighting with you half the time. Fans today still praise these titles for their ambition and charm. Let's be honest, Sega repeatedly fumbled the bag. Their marketing was bad, their hardware launches made no sense, and they were beefing developers more than they were supporting. They made too many consoles too fast, had no proper third-party support, Sonic games were getting worse, and really, Sony and Nintendo just outplayed them. And with a record speed run into irrelevance, Sega went from console king into meme material in under a decade. So what does Sega do now? Well, with no more consoles, they're just a game developer and publisher, like a washed footballer who's now a Sky Sports pundit. They still make Sonic games, but critical reception is very mixed. For every title praised online like Sonic Generations or Sonic Mania, there are poorly received ones like Sonic Forces or diverse experiments like Sonic Frontiers. They found more consistent success with the Yakuza Like a Dragon series, Persona, and Football Manager. They also just license Sonic out now. Xbox, Nintendo, I'm not sure about PlayStation, but I'll come back to you on that one, all have access to their titles, even having console exclusives with the Wii U or the Xbox 360. That's where Sega is now. I'm quite a new baby. Sega consoles weren't being published when I was born, and I didn't even know they existed until a couple years ago. I don't have much experience with Sonic. This is all done with research, so if you have any queries, please do not come at me. I've used the best of my abilities that I learned in year 5 on how to Google things. But I'm not saying I know everything, apart from the fact that I know everything. Peace out, fam lamb.